Hello, and welcome to the Memory Card. Today, we're going to talk about TimeSplitters on the PlayStation 2.
This game not only marks the beginning of my favorite first-person shooter series, but the beginning of the PS2 generation in general, for a few reasons. This and its sequel, TimeSplitters 2, are some of the first PS2 games that I remember getting as a kid since they were Christmas presents. TimeSplitters was a launch title for the North American release of the PlayStation 2, and the visuals and gameplay definitely reflect its early release in the PS2's lifespan. And looking back on it now, this game does a great job of illustrating the evolution of games from the N64 and PS1 to this new generation of games. It was a leap that was astounding to me as a child. And TimeSplitters 1 is like the perfect stepping stone between those early 3D games on the PS1, like Spyro and Crash Bandicoot that I played all the time, and the refinement of those 3D graphics and gameplay by the end of the 6th generation of consoles.
The TimeSplitters series follows in the lineage of GoldenEye 007 and Perfect Dark on the N64, but evolves the gameplay in ways that make it much more playable to the modern FPS player. And that shouldn't come as a surprise, since this game was made from a modified version of the GoldenEye engine. And the lineage extends even further than that, because the studio responsible for this series, Free Radical Design, was made by former Rare team members. TimeSplitters was the very first game made by this studio, and it not only honored the previous games they helped make, but also served as an example of the great games to come from this studio, and from this generation of consoles in general.
There's not really much of a story in the original TimeSplitters. The 9 missions of the story mode are fairly short and unconnected. This is changed dramatically in the sequels, but this style of campaign in the first game is still very fun, partially because it can be played as a single-player or co-op experience. This game does establish the general themes of the franchise of time travel, varied and memorable locales, and multiple player characters for the different missions. Each level is set up to be completed fairly quickly, with usually a single objective, like getting some artifact and taking it back to an endpoint of the level. However, when you get the MacGuffin of the level, this causes a species of aliens, the TimeSplitters, to appear and constantly attack you on your way to a level's endpoint. The look of the TimeSplitters changes quite a bit from game to game, but their general role as antagonists never really changes. And in the later installments, there's a bit more motivation given as to why they attack you and things like that, but not so much in the first game.
Despite the fun single player, the biggest reason the first game is remembered is because of its frantic multiplayer mode, with a great variety of playable characters. And that character roster ranges from 60 swingers to cyborgs and mummies. And these characters are unlocked from doing challenge levels and beating single player levels at higher difficulties, which is another aspect carried over into the later releases of the franchise. One of my favorite aspects of the multiplayer is the inclusion of bots, which is something I wish more multiplayer games did nowadays. I can kind of understand that this isn't done as much now because of the focus on online multiplayer, which is sometimes to the detriment of those games, but I still do miss bots in multiplayer regardless. One criticism I do have is that all the multiplayer maps are basically taken from story mode levels. It makes sense that corners would need to be cut to make sure that this could be there at the launch of the PS2, but I am glad that more effort and time was put into the multiplayer maps in the later TimeSplitters games. It was very smart to have TimeSplitters as a launch title for the PS2 because it not only served to show the improvements in games that was to come in the 6th generation of consoles, but it was a mission statement for the future of great shooters and multiplayer games in general that was to come out. Despite my love for the N64, more modern systems and PC games, I still have a great fondness for this entire generation of consoles, the PS2, GameCube, and even some original Xbox games. The PS2 was the home console that I played the most throughout the majority of my childhood. At the time, it felt like games were starting to grow up with me, which is part of why I love this era of games so much. Even though I still really enjoy the first TimeSplitters game, I definitely think that the sequels improved in just about every aspect of the game, whether it's the multiplayer or the single player, or just the general mechanics of the shooting. It's all improved dramatically in the later installments in the series. But I still think it's fun seeing where it all started, whether it's the TimeSplitters series or the PS2 in general, since this was a launch title. Anyway, in the comments below, tell me about your memories of the TimeSplitters series, whether it's the first game or any of the other sequels. And I'm hoping that you'll join me on the rest of my retrospective of the TimeSplitters franchise.